Have you ever wondered what would happen if thousands of demons took over a single person? What would it be like to live under the control of evil, trapped in a body that's no longer yours? Today, we're diving into one of the darkest and most mysterious episodes in the Bible, where Jesus faces a legion of demons in a land filled with pagan influences and hidden beliefs. And believe me, the outcome of this story is so shocking that even the pigs became the unexpected protagonists of a desperate escape. Stick around, because this story is far more than you can imagine. Picture a place where two cultures collide, creating a backdrop of contrasts and mystery. The land of the Gerasenes, located on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, was a territory heavily influenced by Greek culture. Pagan traditions, deeply rooted, blended with the local way of life, standing in stark contrast to the Jewish beliefs that preached the worship of one God and spiritual purity. Here, hidden rituals and mysterious practices were woven into daily life, almost like a reflection of the shadows that loomed over this land. Paganism, with its gods and rituals, not only coexisted but thrived among the population. Statues of deities, sacrifices to idols, and festivals celebrating what the Jews considered forbidden created a dense, almost oppressive atmosphere. It was as if this place stood not only on the edge of the lake but also on the edge of spiritual purity, which Jewish tradition tried so hard to preserve. This cultural blend created the perfect backdrop for extraordinary events. Invisible forces, felt but never seen, seemed to hover over the people, always on the verge of manifesting in unexpected and terrifying ways. The Gadarenes lived on the threshold between the sacred and the profane, where the presence of the supernatural was more than just a rumor. It was a dark reality that everyone, in some way, recognized. At every turn, the echoes of paganism collided with Jewish law. It was a place where the unusual became part of everyday life, and where a simple traveler could feel the tension between these opposing spiritual forces. This land was ripe for something grand, something no one could predict. An event that would challenge not only the culture but the very notions of good and evil that the people held. And then, amid this clash of cultures, a powerful symbol emerged: the pigs. To the Jews, these creatures were seen as unclean, something that should never be touched, let alone consumed. The mere presence of pigs in this land was a glaring testament to the Greek influence that stretched across the region. While the Jews avoided pigs with religious fervor, the Greeks saw them as a normal part of everyday life, used for both commerce and sacrifice in their pagan rituals. The pigs weren't just animals. They were a living reflection of the spiritual contrast that defined the region. Their presence was a visible mark of broken traditions and Jewish resistance in a place where purity had been tainted. That herd of pigs, grazing freely on the hills, represented something much bigger: the cultural and spiritual corruption that permeated the Gadarenes. But there was something deeper in the symbolism of the pigs. They weren't just a reflection of Greek culture. They were also symbols of a latent spiritual impurity, as if the very land had been stained by unseen forces. Forces that lay in wait, ready to reveal themselves. To the Jews, the pigs didn't just defile the land physically but spiritually, serving as a constant reminder of the distance from true faith. It was as if each pig was a piece of a larger puzzle, slowly coming into view. They were a sign of what was to come, something darker and more powerful than the animals themselves. Something that went beyond flesh and blood, a reflection of a spiritual battle about to unfold in a land ruled by foreign influence. And it was amidst this backdrop of spiritual and cultural tension that something unexpected happened. As Jesus stepped ashore in this land steeped in paganism, he was immediately confronted by a man. But this was no ordinary man. His appearance was disturbing at first glance. Filthy, with wild, crazed eyes, he wandered among the tombs, far from civilization, screaming and cutting himself with stones. The darkness that loomed over the region seemed to manifest itself vividly in his behavior. The locals knew him well. He was avoided, feared, as if he were some force of nature, something beyond human control. He had been bound with chains many times, but he would break them as if they were fragile threads, fleeing to the deserts and caves, screaming in torment day and night. No one dared to approach him, and somehow, Everyone understood that what tormented him went far beyond any mental or physical illness. This man was possessed by forces that could not be seen, but whose impact was terrifying. When Jesus saw him, the man ran toward him, but not like someone seeking help. His cries echoed, a mixture of despair and rage, as if two forces were battling within him. The evil that controlled him instantly recognized the greater power that had arrived. The words that came out of his mouth weren't his own, but from the spirits possessing him. It was an encounter that no one there could fully comprehend, except for Jesus. The man's behavior, his uncontrollable and violent actions, were direct reflections of the evil that consumed him. It was as if all the latent wickedness in that land, all the darkness that hovered over the Gerasenes, was concentrated in that one man. The power of evil over him was visible, tangible. And yet, in that moment, standing before Jesus, even the deepest forces of evil trembled. The encounter had just begun, but it was already clear that the balance of power was about to shift dramatically. The atmosphere grew even heavier when Jesus, with his unparalleled calm, looked directly at the possessed man and asked, "What is your name?" What came out of the man's mouth was no ordinary response. Distorted voices, like a macabre chorus, answered, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Legion. In the context of the Roman Empire, this word referred to a military force of about 6,000 soldiers. But here, in this dark land, the name revealed something even more terrifying. This man was controlled by a horde of demons, an unimaginable number of evil entities that had taken complete control of his body and mind. It was as if each of the spirits roaming through this land of darkness had found a home in him, turning him into a vessel of evil. The fact that so many demons inhabited a single man made his condition all the more desperate. He wasn't just possessed by one entity, but by a true legion of infernal forces. It was a demonstration of how deeply evil could take root in someone, and the immense power those forces held over him. Yet, there stood Jesus, showing not a trace of fear. The one who had authority over all spiritual realms, including the evil forces that controlled this man. This confrontation wasn't merely physical, but a spiritual battle at its core. And the mere fact that these demons, despite their overwhelming numbers, trembled before Jesus showed the incomparable power he held. The revelation of the name Legion not only reinforced the magnitude of the evil within that man, but also made the miracle that was about to happen all the more remarkable. To free a soul from a single possession was already extraordinary, but to release this man from thousands of demons was beyond comprehension. Yet, in the presence of Jesus' authority, even the mightiest legion could not stand for long. The tension in the air was palpable, as the word legion still echoed in everyone's minds. But something unexpected happened. The demons, aware of Jesus' absolute power, began to beg. They feared being sent to the abyss, that place of eternal torment and final imprisonment, from which they would no longer be able to torment souls or roam freely in the world. It was as if, for the first time, evil stood before an authority so superior that all that remained was despair. And then, they made a strange, almost incomprehensible request. "Let us enter the pigs." Nearby, grazing in the field, was a large herd of pigs, animals considered unclean by the Jews, symbols of everything that was not sacred. With no other option, the demons asked to take refuge in these animals. And with a simple gesture, without raising his voice or showing any effort, Jesus granted their request. Immediately, the demons left the man, and the pigs, now possessed by that legion of evil spirits, were thrown into an indescribable frenzy. The entire herd, overtaken by uncontrollable panic, began running wildly, as if hell itself were driving them. The scene was chaotic, a herd of pigs rushing without direction, until, in a final desperate movement, they all ran toward the cliff. The ground shook under the weight of the animals. Their terrified screams filled the air, and then, in an instant, it was over. The pigs plunged over the cliff and into the sea, where they were swallowed by the raging waters, drowning. The scene was a clear symbol. Evil, defeated and cast out, had met its dramatic and final end. The now calm waters, where there had once been turmoil, were a sign that something profound had occurred. The demons, who had held such power over one man, were silenced. The evil that had reigned over that region was subdued, overcome by the authority of Jesus. The pigs, symbolizing impurity, became the temporary vessels for the destruction of evil, and their fall into the sea represented the collapse of the dark forces that had tormented that land for so long. Peace now returned, and the miracle of that man's deliverance echoed as a visible testimony to the defeat of evil. The silence that followed the pigs' fall into the sea seemed to weigh heavily on the land. The calm was almost surreal after such chaos. Yet, while evil had been dramatically defeated, the impact of that event wasn't limited to the spiritual. The local community, which had lived so long with the madness of the possessed man, now faced a new reality, one that brought as much fear as the man's previous condition. The herd of pigs that drowned in the sea wasn't just a spiritual symbol. For the Gadarenes, those pigs represented wealth, commerce, livelihood. The local economy relied heavily on raising and selling pigs, something deeply rooted in the Greek culture that dominated the region. The loss of such a large herd wasn't just an economic tragedy, it was a catastrophe. The owners of the pigs, and even the inhabitants who depended on the trade generated by these animals, began calculating the loss. The financial impact was severe, and the sudden loss brought unease. Many looked at the sea with perplexed faces, others in despair. How would they survive now? The fear of an imminent crisis spread quickly, and with it, a new kind of fear, not spiritual but material. The deliverance of the possessed man, as miraculous as it was, came with consequences that the community wasn't prepared to face. The presence of Jesus, who had just shown his power over the demons, now seemed like a threat to their way of life. If his arrival had caused such economic loss, what else might he change? So, in a mixture of fear and pragmatism, the town's leaders and residents gathered and, with solemn tones, asked Jesus to leave. They feared the changes and the economic impact of his presence more than they rejoiced in the miracle they had witnessed. It wasn't that they didn't recognize his power, but the transformations he brought threatened the comfortable balance in which they lived. At that moment, the contrast between spiritual liberation and material needs became evident. Evil had been cast out, but their hearts were still bound by the fear of loss and uncertainty. The irony was bitter. Jesus, the liberator, was rejected not because of his power, but because his presence challenged the stability of their status quo. In the midst of the economic and spiritual turmoil that had fallen upon the Gadarenes, there stood one figure that symbolized something entirely different. The man who had been freed from the legion of demons. Now standing before Jesus, he was the embodiment of liberation and transformation. His eyes, once filled with torment and despair, were now calm, serene. His mind, once dominated by voices that weren't his own, finally belonged to him again. With his heart overflowing with gratitude, the man fell at Jesus' feet and begged. He wanted to follow him, to be his disciple, to travel with him wherever he went. It was a natural reaction. Jesus had freed him from the invisible chains that had bound him, and now he wanted nothing more than to devote his life to following the Savior who had rescued him. But Jesus, with a compassionate look and a touch of wisdom, did something unexpected. Instead of accepting the request, he told the man, "Go home and tell how much God has done for you." Jesus knew that the impact of that deliverance couldn't be confined to a small group of disciples. The man's story needed to be told. His life, once a living example of evil's dominion, would now be a powerful testimony to God's redeeming power. He would be a light shining in the darkness that still reigned in that land. So, instead of physically following Jesus, the man returned to his community. But he wasn't the same. Where he had once walked in isolation, he now walked free. Where his presence had been feared, he now brought hope. And his voice, which had once screamed in despair among the tombs, now proclaimed the deliverance he had experienced. Throughout the region of the Gadarenes, his story echoed. He became a living testimony that no matter how strong evil might be, no matter how deep the darkness, there is always hope in Christ. The people who once avoided him now listened to him attentively. He no longer needed chains to be controlled, for the power of God had completely transformed him. And so, as Jesus departed, leaving the Gadarenes behind, the man's testimony continued to grow. His name, once associated with madness and despair, was now remembered as the symbol of a miracle that transformed not just one life, but an entire region. In a land once shrouded in shadows, his story brought light, proclaiming that victory over evil was possible, and he was the living proof of it.